Clara Martins sat on her old couch, fingers trembling over the trackpad, staring at an email that didn't make sense. No subject line, no sender she recognized. Just one simple offer that read like a joke. Pretend to be my wife for one weekend. Well paid. Her rent was overdue. The electricity flickered with warnings, and her last paintbrush lay dry from weeks of neglect. And yet, something about the message felt like the beginning of a real story. She'd always lived between colors and canvases, but now life was painted in gray. Once known in local galleries, Clara had become invisible to a world moving too fast to notice artists anymore. She missed laughter echoing in her studio, missed the rhythm of inspiration that used to hit her like summer rain. But now, even her dreams had grown quiet, muffled by debt and doubt. So why did this absurd proposal feel like a whisper of hope? The name on the contract, Alexandre Vasconcelos, rang a distant bell. A tech magnate, private, unreachable. His face had graced business magazines, always paired with headlines like The Reclusive Genius or Brazil's Reluctant Heir. Why would a man like him need to fabricate love? The thought alone made Clara chuckle, until she reread the fee offered. Enough to reset her life, enough to matter. Still, something about accepting felt like selling a piece of herself. Could she really fake affection? Could she lie with her eyes, laugh on cue, walk arm in arm with a stranger and still sleep at night? These weren't just doubts. They were warnings from the parts of her that still believed in sincerity. But there was another part, tired, hungry, desperate, that whispered, maybe this emotional story won't be so fake after all. She hit reply, slowly, carefully. I'm interested. Let's talk. The words felt like stepping off a ledge with no idea what lay below. Within minutes, she received a response. Location, time, confidentiality clause. It was all too real now. And with each passing second, the weight of her decision settled in her chest like fog before a storm. As she prepared for the meeting, Clara rehearsed the kind of woman she thought a millionaire's wife should be. Confident, mysterious, elegant. She tried on old dresses she'd once worn to art openings, suddenly aware of every fray and faded color. But no wardrobe could hide the fact that she wasn't pretending yet, and already felt like someone else. By the time she stepped out of her apartment, contract signed and suitcase in hand, the line between role and reality had already started to blur. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from a strange sense of purpose. Maybe this was wrong, maybe it was insane, but wasn't every real story built on unexpected turns? As the car pulled up to take her away, she wondered just how much pretending would be required and whether she'd remember how to stop. The car ride felt like a dream Clara hadn't earned. Long, smooth roads curled through the countryside until a wrought iron gate opened like the entrance to another universe. Beyond it stood the Vasconcelos estate, grand, flawless, and painfully silent. The kind of place where even the walls whispered power. Stepping out, Clara suddenly felt like a smudge on a white canvas. Alexander greeted her at the door, his expression unreadable, his posture perfect. He didn't offer a hug or even a handshake, just a nod, like she was a business deal being delivered on time. This is just a performance, he reminded her, his voice cold and rehearsed. We stick to the script, no improvising. It wasn't a welcome, it was a boundary. The mansion was a maze of marble and glass, every detail curated with intention. A butler showed Clara to a guest room bigger than her entire apartment, where a rack of designer clothes waited, already in her size. She wondered how much of her life he'd researched. It didn't feel romantic, it felt calculated. And yet, a strange curiosity bubbled beneath her nerves. They spent hours rehearsing their fake relationship like two actors in a low-budget play. How they met, how long they'd been together, their inside jokes. Clara laughed once, off-script, and caught a flicker of surprise on Alexander's face, like he'd forgotten what real laughter sounded like. But just as quickly, the mask returned. Still, something had shifted. Later that evening, as they dined in a dimly lit room built for 10, but filled by only 2, Clara caught glimpses of the man behind the mask. He asked her about art, not in passing, but with real interest. And when she answered, there was no judgment, only silence and thought. She wasn't just a prop to him, not entirely. There was something broken in his eyes she couldn't stop noticing. The mansion might have been built for royalty, but the atmosphere felt like a cage. Servants moved like shadows, and everything had a place, except warmth. Alexandre moved through it like a ghost with routines, not desires. Clara realized this wasn't just about fooling people. This was about survival. Not hers, his. She wondered how many others had played this role before her, and if any had looked closely enough to see what she now saw. There was pain hidden beneath all that precision, grief tucked behind every polished smile. And though this was supposed to be pretend, something inside her stirred with the uncomfortable feeling that maybe, just maybe, this touching story had begun long before she ever arrived. At first, their public displays of affection felt awkward, too rehearsed, too stiff. Clara held Alexandre's arm like a stranger, trying not to slip. But under candlelight, surrounded by family chatter and clinking silverware, something began to shift. Her laughter no longer waited for permission, and his smiles, once mechanical, started to linger just a little too long. His mother was the first to notice. "There's a calmness in him when you're near," she said, gently squeezing Clara's hand. Clara faked a blush, but inside, she was caught off guard. Was she truly making that kind of difference? Or was everyone simply seeing what they wanted? It was a delicate game, and the lines between role and reality were fading fast. They started finishing each other's sentences, not out of practice, but instinct. Clara caught herself watching the way Alexandre stirred his coffee, or how his lips curled when amused. These weren't details she'd been asked to memorize. They were things she simply began to notice. And somehow, that scared her more than any contract clause. Alexandre, too, was slipping. He called her Clara, in private, even when no one was around to hear. He asked about her childhood, her dreams, the things that made her angry. It was no longer about playing the part. It was about connection. The emotional story they were crafting wasn't just fooling others. It was fooling them both. One evening, alone on the veranda, he reached for her hand without thinking. No cameras, no audience, just two people caught in a web of lies that somehow started to feel like truth. "You're easy to be around," he said, softly. And for a moment, she didn't know whether to respond as Clara the actress or Clara, the woman falling into something real. The staff adored her. His cousins asked for her opinions. Even a family dog seemed to choose her side of the couch. She was no longer just a guest in Alexandre's world. She was being absorbed by it, and it terrified her because for the first time in years, she felt like she belonged somewhere. But was it her, or just the character she was playing? That night, Clara lay in the guest room and stared at the ceiling, trying to remember the boundaries they'd agreed on. But they had blurred like watercolors left out in the rain. What began as a lie was becoming a real story neither of them could control, and deep down, she knew something was coming that would force them to confront it. The atmosphere turned brittle the moment she walked in. Isadora, Alexandre's ex-elegant, sharp-eyed, and radiating suspicion. Her presence cracked the weekend's delicate illusion like porcelain dropped on stone. "She's not who she says she is," Isadora murmured to a nearby cousin, just loud enough. Clara felt the sting before the confrontation even began. At dinner, Isadora struck. "Tell me again how you two met," she asked, slicing her steak with too much force. Clara answered calmly, rehearsed, but her voice trembled just slightly. Alexandre stepped in, correcting a detail, too quickly, too perfectly. The room stilled. Doubts hovered in the air, waiting to land. This wasn't just drama, it was unraveling. Alexandre's father raised an eyebrow. His sister looked down at her plate. Someone coughed to break the tension. Isadora leaned back in her chair, satisfied. She had planted the seed, and Alexandre, normally composed, tightened his jaw in a way Clara hadn't seen before. Not anger, pain. Something long buried was surfacing, and it had little to do with her. Later, behind closed doors, the facade crumbled. Alexandre didn't yell. He didn't blame. He just Saturday, do you know what it's like, he whispered, to be loved for the version of you they think you are? Clara said nothing. She knew that silence sometimes healed more than words. And so she stayed, not as his fake wife, just as herself. He opened up about betrayals, not just from lovers, but from those closest to him. Family, partners, friends who used him until there was nothing left but expectations. They never wanted me. They wanted the image. It wasn't a confession. It was a breaking. And in that moment, Clara saw him not as the millionaire, just a man who'd forgotten how to trust. She didn't reach for his hand. She didn't promise it would get better. Instead, she simply sat down beside him and listened. And somehow, that quiet companionship spoke louder than declarations. It wasn't the kind of moment found in movies. It was the kind that shapes touching stories people carry for the rest of their lives. Raw, unfiltered, real. The next morning, no one mentioned Isadora. No one needed to. The tension had evaporated, but something else remained in the air. Truth. Not the scripted kind, the lived kind. And though neither Clara nor Alexandre said it out loud, they both knew nothing would be the same from here. The performance had ended, but something far more honest had begun to take the stage. Clara left the estate without a word. No dramatic farewell, no final glance. Just the soft sound of her suitcase wheels across the stone driveway, and the way the morning mist clung to her hair. Alexandre didn't stop her, and she didn't wait for him to. Some stories don't end in fireworks. Some just dissolve into quiet. The city felt smaller now. Her apartment, once a nest of chaos, felt oddly comforting in its imperfections. She noticed the peeling paint, the creaky floorboard by the bathroom door. But instead of shame, she felt grounded. Her life was hers again, and even though her heart carried echoes of the mansion, she had no regrets. The money paid the debts. The rent, the electricity, the silence that had hung over her like a thread, all gone. But the real change wasn't in her bank account. It was in her spirit. Something about pretending to be loved had unlocked a part of her that remembered how to believe in connection. And that belief didn't fade. Clara returned to her studio, not to paint for galleries, but for herself. Each brushstroke carried emotion she hadn't felt in years. Blues bled into golds, reds burned through shadows. They weren't masterpieces, they were memories. Moments. Fragments of a weekend that had started as fiction, but ended as a real story she couldn't deny. She stopped checking her phone. No messages, no unknown numbers. Just stillness. At first, it made her anxious, then it made her brave. If Alexandre never reached out, she'd be fine. Because what they had wasn't about rescue or romance. It was about rediscovery, about the art of showing up for yourself when no one else does. Still, sometimes late at night, she'd replay their conversations in her mind. The way his voice softened when he talked about music, the look in his eyes when he said, "You make things feel less heavy." It wasn't a fantasy. It was a connection, fragile, unfinished, and strangely beautiful. A touching story that didn't beg for a happy ending, just an honest one. She didn't need closure. She needed truth. And for now, that truth was simple. She was enough, with or without him. And maybe, just maybe, if he ever stepped back into her life, it wouldn't be about filling a role, but about choosing something real. Something neither of them could script. It was a rainy Thursday when he showed up. No luxury car, no tailored suit, just Alexandre standing outside Clara's studio with his hands deep in his coat pockets. He looked like someone searching for words, but knowing that words alone wouldn't be enough. There was no plan, no performance, just presence. And sometimes, that's all it takes. Clara opened the door slowly, unsure if she was ready. Not for answers, but for the flood of emotion she thought she had sealed away. Alexandre didn't step forward. He waited, eyes tracing the paint smudges on her apron, the streak of blue in her hair. "I don't have a proposal this time," he said. "Just a question." He walked inside only after she nodded. The studio smelled like turpentine and courage. He glanced around at the paintings, abstract, wild, free. "You didn't stop creating," he whispered. She smiled. "No, I started again." It wasn't just an update. It was a statement. She hadn't waited for him. She had continued her story. Then came the moment neither of them could rehearse. "Can I be part of your real life?" Alexander asked, not with grand promises, not with perfect timing, but with sincerity, with eyes that no longer hid behind strategy or pain. He wasn't trying to buy her presence. He was asking permission to stay. Clara didn't rush her answer. She walked over to a canvas, ran her fingers across the texture. Life wasn't a perfect stroke. It was messy, layered, unpredictable. But this was her canvas. And for once, someone was asking to share it, not rewrite it. It wasn't about the past anymore. It was about what they could choose right now. "I don't need you to fix anything," she said. "Just be honest. Be here. And be human." He nodded, the kind of nod that comes from understanding, not negotiation. It was quiet, but powerful. The kind of moment that doesn't shout love, it simply breathes it. An emotional story, not because of what they said, but because of what they didn't have to. As they sat down, two people without roles, without masks, without scripts, Clara felt something settle inside her. Not certainty, but peace. Not magic, but meaning. The lie that brought them together had faded. What remained was something better, a choice. And choices, when real, rewrite stories in ways no fiction ever could. Have you ever pretended to feel something, only to realize it was real all along? What would you do if someone showed up at your door, not with promises, but with the courage to ask if they could stay? Do we choose love, or does love choose us when we least expect it? Clara's journey wasn't about romance. It was about remembering who she was when no one else was watching. And Alexander? He learned that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the only way to build something real. But what about you? Have you ever lived a moment that felt like fiction but changed you forever? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what part of this emotional story hit you the hardest. We love hearing your real stories too. And if you want more touching stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because the next story might just be yours.